Hello, my name's Rachel Monroe, and this is not just a story about losing a house, it's about losing the people I thought would always be on my side. A few months ago, I came back from a weekend trip to find the locks changed. My parents, yes, my own parents had kicked me out to give my home to my younger sister, Ava. The worst part, I bought that house. Every single brick. The scent of pine still lingered on the porch I paid for, but the door no longer opened for me. The late summer air still carried a gentle warmth, the kind that made the pine needles underfoot give off that earthy, nostalgic scent. I stood on the porch, the one I had chosen from a catalog, the one I had paid for, and stared at a door that refused to acknowledge me. My key, once so familiar in my palm, now turned useless in the lock. It clicked halfway, then stuck. I tried again, and again. My heartbeat quickened with every failed attempt, but my hands moved with practiced calm, like maybe if I pretended this wasn't happening, the truth wouldn't set in. The last time I stood here, I was laughing. I'd just returned from the bank, the mortgage freshly inked my name listed proudly on every page. But Dad said it was better to add his name just for bank purposes. He had smiled in case anything happens. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Now the welcome mat looked like a joke. I dropped my weekend bag beside me and leaned against the doorframe, my fingers tracing the wood grain I remembered sanding myself last spring. I didn't call right away. I wanted to believe this was a mistake, a glitch, a locksmith error maybe. But then I noticed the camera above the porch had been angled differently. Not broken, not removed, just adjusted. Watching, not welcoming. I pulled out my phone. No missed calls, but there was one voicemail from Mom. Rachel, honey, it's me. Listen. Ava needs a fresh start. You can understand that, right? She's been through so much lately. Just don't make a scene, okay? The words played softly like she was asking me to excuse a forgotten birthday. Not a home invasion, not a betrayal. I stared out at the quiet cul-de-sac. The Thompsons' curtains rustled across the street. Mr. Henley's sprinkler was still on, hissing across the driveway in rhythmic arcs. Two kids biked past without glancing up. And yet I felt eyes on me, like the whole neighborhood knew something I didn't. I called Mom. No answer. I called Dad, straight to voicemail. I paced the length of the porch for a while, half hoping someone would come out and explain, but no one did. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Eventually, I walked back to my car. It wasn't even parked in the driveway anymore. Ava's little blue hybrid sat there now like a stamp of ownership. Her window upstairs, my old room, was lit soft yellow, spilling out into the dusk. I wondered what she was doing in there. Sitting on my bed, using my bathroom. Touching my books, I opened the car door, tossed my bag into the back seat, and sat down. The seatbelt light blinked at me like a warning I didn't need. The air inside was stale, clinging to the scent of coffee and old receipts. I adjusted the seat back, pulled a sweater over my legs, and tried to make the angle comfortable. Sleep wouldn't come easy. Not here. Not like this. The night passed in fragments, dog barks, headlights, my own mind reeling in cycles of disbelief and shame. I kept checking my phone, expecting no hoping for a call that never came. No apology, no explanation, just silence. Morning crept in with a pale, indifferent light. My back ached. My mouth tasted like metal. I splashed water from a bottle on my face and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes were swollen, my lips pressed into a flat line. Something had shifted in me overnight. Something permanent. I stepped out of the car, stretched, and glanced back at the house. The porch was still there, so familiar it hurt. The curtains upstairs had shifted slightly. Then I saw her car again, parked right where mine used to be. Ava was home. I hadn't seen her since the last family dinner when she cried over how hard life had been for her lately, how no one really understood. Everyone coddled her like she was made of porcelain. I used to believe that was love. I used to envy it. Now, standing on the curb in the same wrinkled clothes from yesterday, I saw it for what it was. I bought this house, but I was no longer welcome, and no one even looked me in the eye. Ava always made messes. I always cleaned them up. Now she's been gifted my life. The bitterness on my tongue wasn't from the lukewarm coffee Carol had handed me. It was older than that. Deeper. I sipped anyway, mostly out of politeness, though my hands trembled slightly as I held the chipped mug. Her guest room filled with old books, and the scent of lavender oil was the kind of quiet that made you hear your own thoughts too clearly. I stared out the window, watching the drizzle slick the sidewalks of her sleepy neighborhood. So different from mine. From what used to be mine. You okay? Carol asked, gently drying her hands on a dish towel. I nodded, then shook my head. I don't know. I slept in my car last night. Her face softened with concern. Why didn't you call me sooner? Because I didn't want to believe it. Because part of me still hoped this was some twisted mistake and someone would explain everything in the morning, complete with apologies and tears. But there were no apologies. Only that voicemail and the glaring absence of keys that used to work. She's back, Carol said, like the words had weight. Ava. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Carol sat down beside me, eyes scanning mine like she wanted to say more. I saw her at church last Sunday. She went up to the front, said she'd fallen away, but was ready to start anew. Even called herself a prodigal. I snorted. Since when does Ava believe in consequences? Carol shrugged. She doesn't. But she knows how to sell them. My mind flicked back to when we were kids. I was 8. Ava had just turned 6. That was the year I wanted a blue bicycle with streamers on the handles. My parents said no, said money was tight. But the next week, Ava cried in front of Dad about how everyone else has a bike. And by Saturday there, it was brand new, sparkly, and unmistakably blue. She even made me help her put the streamers on. I didn't get a bike that year. She's painting herself as some kind of survivor, Carol muttered. Told people she got laid off in Portland for taking a stand against unethical business practices. You believe that? She got fired for forging expense reports, I said flatly. I covered it up for her. Twice. Then why are you the one in exile? I didn't have an answer. Just a tight feeling in my chest that pulsed with every breath. Carol stood up and rummaged through a stack of mail on the counter. You might want to see this. She handed me a folded church newsletter, its paper still creased from the offering basket. The cover featured a sun-drenched photo of the church's front steps, and right below it, a profile of Ava. I froze. She was smiling modestly, a soft focus halo effect around her hair. The headline read, Grace and Second Chances, A Journey Back to Faith. The article was filled with vague anecdotes about hitting rock bottom, the importance of family support, and how faith and forgiveness had helped her see what truly mattered. My name wasn't mentioned. Neither was Portland, or the forged reports, or the stolen house. She's not just back, Carol whispered. She's staging a comeback. I clenched the paper until the ink smudged slightly under my thumb. I knew this move. I'd seen it before when she cried in front of our teachers to get out of detention, when she played sick to steal my birthday attention, when she framed me for scratching Mom's car with her keys. Ava wasn't content to mess up her life quietly. She needed to reframe the mess as art, then take a bow. Carol sat across from me again. You can't let her control the narrative. She already is. I opened the article again, scanning every line like it might unlock some hidden code. But it was just fiction. Neatly written, palatable fiction. She stole the house, I murmured. But that wasn't the point. She's rewriting the story, with her as the heroine. It wasn't just a house she stole. She was rewriting the story with her as the heroine. They told me I was family. Then they handed me a copy of a transfer deed I never signed. The manila folder felt heavier than it should have. It sat in my lap like a brick of truth wrapped in polite bureaucracy, the edges sharp against my jeans as I shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair at the county records office. The clerk, a soft-spoken woman with tortoiseshell glasses and a faint coffee stain on her blouse, had slid it across the counter without even looking me in the eye. I doubted she meant anything by it. But after everything, the smallest gestures felt loaded. Let me know if you need anything else, she said, already turning to the next person in line. I opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were the documents tied to the property I once called home my home. I skimmed quickly at first, then slower like I didn't trust my own eyes. There it was, dated July 12th. A transfer deed moving ownership of the property from Rachel Monroe to David Monroe, my father. The signature next to my name looked convincing, slanted in a way that mimicked my own, but I never signed it. I was in Chicago that week at a tech summit for work. I still had the flight receipts. The next page hit even harder, Ava's name. Listed as beneficiary occupant, marked in neat impersonal language like it was a minor footnote. Nothing in the tone betrayed the violence of it, the erasure of a reality I had built from saving sweat and blind trust. I sat back in the chair, feeling the stale air of the records office press in around me. My ears buzzed. This was no longer about being kicked out. This was fraud, carefully orchestrated, quietly executed. A memory stabbed through Dad back in March, standing over a stack of paperwork. Don't worry about the legal stuff, he had said, waving his hand. I'll take care of it. Just trust me. And I had. Like a fool. Back at Carol's, I spread the papers across her coffee table. The TV was off the windows, shut tight against the creeping fall breeze. She brought tea untouched. Her face darkened with every page I turned toward her. They backdated it, I said hollowly. They made it look like I willingly gave the house to Dad. And then he handed it off. To her. Carol didn't answer right away. She sat across from me, her brows furrowed, hands clasped together like she was praying for restraint. Or for me. They didn't just trick you, she finally said. They rewrote the script. Paper by paper. I have no idea how they even got away with this, I murmured. Wouldn't the bank need my authorization? She nodded slowly. Unless your father still had co-ownership status from the original mortgage. If he did, and you weren't careful about closing that loop, he could have shifted things around without your active consent. Especially if someone at the bank looked the other way. I should have never trusted him, I said, my voice breaking. Rachel, if you let them hold the pen, they'll write you out of the story, she said softly. The bitterness in her tone wasn't directed at me, it was shared. She'd seen this before. Not this exact thing, but the same kind of manipulation, quiet, legal, and utterly devastating. I stared again at the signature. It was good. Close enough that someone skimming wouldn't catch it. But I knew my hand. I knew the slant of my R's the way I looped my L's. This wasn't mine. It was a forgery. A careful, practiced one. The rage that had been simmering in me for days now started to boil. Because this wasn't an emotional betrayal anymore, it was calculated. Institutional. They'd used the tools of the system bank's paperwork records to erase my claim. Not just to the house, but to the truth. I grabbed my laptop and began to dig. Email threads, flight itineraries, timestamps. I needed to trail something airtight. Something that could puncture their version of the story. Carol watched me, arms folded, her silence an offering. She wasn't going to stop me. If anything, she looked relieved, like she'd been waiting for this fire to catch. I'll call a lawyer, I said more to myself than anyone else. And I'll get a forensic handwriting analyst. If that signature's fake, I'll prove it. Carol nodded. Good, because once you do, you'll have more than just a paper trail. You'll have leverage. I looked again at the deed. I'd lost a house. But I hadn't lost the facts. Not yet. They didn't just steal the house. They rewrote reality. Justice doesn't come easy in towns where everyone sings in the same choir. The steeple looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the way the fog clung to the old bricks, or how the morning sun refracted through the stained glass, casting warm hues that felt undeserved. I hadn't set foot inside Christlight Fellowship in over a year. Not since the Christmas Eve service, where Ava had cried during Silent Night and someone had handed her tissues like she was breaking under the weight of some beautiful sorrow. Even then, I should have seen it. The performance, the stage. But I was too busy singing along. Today, I kept to the back pew. Carol had offered to come, but I told her no. This was something I needed to see for myself. The sanctuary was already filling up, couples holding hands, teenagers in ill-fitting slacks, widows with plastic name tags, and purses full of butterscotch candies. I scanned their faces as they passed, looking for recognition. Some saw me and offered tight smiles. Others looked away. I wasn't surprised. The choir began to hum the prelude, and right on cue, Ava entered. She looked radiant, like someone bathed in morning light and careful planning. Her hair was curled softly, her blouse a pristine ivory, modest, yet flattering. I could almost hear the whispered comments around me. She's glowing. God really changed her heart. She's come so far. I clenched my jaw and stared straight ahead. Pastor Brennan welcomed the congregation with the same practiced warmth he'd perfected over decades. His voice had that gravelly calm a tone that could make a confession sound like a benediction. He opened with a reading from Luke, something about the lost sheep. Then he gestured toward Ava. We are blessed today, he said, to hear a testimony from one of our own, someone who's walked through darkness and chosen the light. Applause. Real sustained applause. I wanted to scream. Ava took the mic with both hands, head slightly bowed. I've made mistakes. She began, her voice trembling at just the right frequency. I lost my way. I let pride and fear guide me, but God never gave up on me. And this community, you never gave up either. I bit the inside of my cheek, hard. She spoke for 10 minutes, about hitting rock bottom, about forgiveness, about starting over. She never mentioned Portland, never said why she had to start over. but she didn't need to. The omissions made room for people to fill in their own redemptive versions. I learned that home isn't just a place, she said, casting a gentle glance toward the front row, where Pastor Brennan nodded in solemn approval. It's the people who believe in your second chance. The applause this time was thunderous. After the service, the church lawn transformed into a potluck spread of casseroles and lemonade. I hovered near the edge, a plate of untouched deviled eggs in hand, while the whispering began in earnest. Two women near the parking lot leaned in close. She's stronger than I thought, turning her life around like that. Honestly, I feel bad for Rachel, but she's making this about money. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This wasn't about money. This was about identity theft dressed in virtue, about betrayal masked as grace. Someone bumped into me gently. A tall figure in a weathered jacket, Ethan. We hadn't spoken in months, not since the Thanksgiving where I accidentally dropped cranberry sauce in his lap, and Ava laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. He offered a tight nod. Hey, Rach. Didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, me neither, I said, voice low. He glanced toward the crowd. Ava's really taken root again, I noticed. I heard she might get into the redemption program, he said cautiously. Housing aid counseling, maybe even a stipend. Of course she is, I whispered, barely controlling the venom in my tone. Before I could say more, Pastor Brennan clapped his hands and called for attention. We have an announcement, he said, smiling broadly. Our church is proud to nominate Ava Monroe as a candidate for the Community Redemption Program, a model of spiritual restoration. As part of this, she will be granted support in maintaining her current housing while she continues her journey. Applause again, even louder this time. A few people stood to clap. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. That current housing he spoke of, my house? The one I'd paid for. The one with my sweat in the drywall and my name in the foundation until they forged me out of it. And now she was being honored for living there. I watched her standing near the dais, smiling modestly, hands clasped like a saint in a stained glass window. They were crowning her in broad daylight, not just forgiving her, but lifting her. I was watching them crown her saint in the very house I paid for. She handed me a brass key, not to a house, but to the past. It was heavier than I expected. Small, tarnished, and warm from her palm, the key lay across my open hand like an artifact. There was no label, no engraving, just the familiar weight of something that had been used often and hidden long. I looked up at Carol, her face lined with worry and resolve. It's for the attic, she said, voice quieter than usual. I locked it up years ago. Didn't think I'd ever open it again. The stairs creaked beneath us as we climbed. The second floor of Carol's home smelled like lavender and cedar, but the attic held something older, dust paper, forgotten air. She fumbled with the lock and pushed open the door. It was like stepping into a time capsule. Stacks of boxes lined the sloped walls, some labeled in Carol's slanted handwriting. Taxes 2012, 2015. Old photos. Monroe side mom's stuff. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting soft shadows across the room. I didn't move, afraid that anything I touched might unravel the careful silence she'd preserved for years. Carol moved with purpose, pulling down a battered banker's box and setting it on a collapsible card table. Sit, she said. It's time. We sifted through the past like archaeologists. Receipts letters, old church programs, one from Ava's Purity Pledge ceremony, another from her failed music recital that turned into a standing ovation anyway. My own name appeared sporadically, usually in the margins or as an afterthought. Carol handed me a plastic sleeve. Inside was a cashier's check copy dated June 5th, 2017, issued from my bank. For the exact down payment on the house. You gave this to your father, she said. I remember. You came by afterward, buzzing with excitement. And then poof, nothing in your name. I swallowed hard, staring at the ink. This is real. This proves I paid for it. Exactly, she said. You were young, trusting. They asked to manage things until your credit improved. And you believed them. I nodded, silent. They erased anyone who didn't idolize Ava, Carol continued. That's why I left. Your mom told me to stop sowing division when I defended you. Called me bitter. Told me not to come to Thanksgiving anymore. She pulled another folder from the box, her hands trembling slightly. Here. It was a letter. Handwritten in familiar looping cursive. I knew it before I read the name. Lorraine Monroe. It was dated February 2019. Carol watched me as I read, Rachel has always been distant. Too logical. She doesn't understand softness. I worry she's too cold for motherhood, too. Calculating to love without expectation. The words blurred. I blinked. Again. The sting behind my eyes refused to fade. She wrote this. About me. Carol nodded. Why would she send this to you? She wanted me to understand why she kept me away, she said flatly. Why you needed Ava. Why I was the problem. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just manipulation. This was rewriting the family narrative, turning me into a villain to justify everything they did. Ethan's name lit up my phone just then. I put him on speaker. Got a minute, he asked. Yeah, I just uncovered a lot. I told him about the check, the attic, the letter. He whistled low. Rachel, this might be enough to file civil fraud, especially if the signature on the deed is provably false. My heart thudded. You really think so? You'd need a handwriting analyst and a lawyer who deals in real estate fraud? But yeah, you've got a paper trail. Carol placed a hand on mine. Her touch was warm, grounding. It's not just Ava, she said softly. Your parents needed a saint. Someone they could parade around to hide the cracks in their own image. You were too real. Too strong. I couldn't speak. I stared at the check again, at my name written in clean, unwavering type. Proof of everything I'd built. Proof of everything they'd stolen. Maybe I hadn't lost my mind. Maybe I'd just been surrounded by people determined to make me question it. And now, sitting in an attic of ghosts and yellowing paper, I finally understood the magnitude of their betrayal. They hadn't just taken my house. I didn't lose a home. I lost the right to believe they ever saw me. I read the contract twice. The third time I saw the dagger. The paper crinkled in my hands, thin and glossy like betrayal printed on office stock. I squinted at the dense block of text, each clause coiled in legalese, like snakes sleeping in plain sight. Somewhere in these lines was the justification they used to gut me. My name removed, my authority stripped, and Ava handed everything as if I'd never existed. I can't believe I signed this, I murmured, though I didn't remember ever doing so. You didn't, Mr. Vance said, pulling the document gently from my grasp. That's the problem. We sat in his cluttered office, its walls lined with books that smelled like old bourbon and dust. Files teetered on the edges of his desk. Coffee stains overlapped across old manila folders like forgotten bloodstains. Vance tapped the signature block. Here's the kicker. This transfer was filed under a durable power of attorney. See here? He circled a line. David Monroe had legal authority to act in your name because of this. He slid another document toward me. I recognized my name scrawled under a shaky paragraph that essentially said I relinquished control during any incapacitation. The date June 28th, 2000. He said before I could speak. Ring any bells, my breath hitched. That was the weekend I was in the hospital, I whispered. After the car accident. Exactly. Vance said, his voice low and even. They used your injury as legal permission. Carol, seated beside me with her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose, handed me a folded paper. I pulled your old bank statements, she said. The check cleared the same week as the power of attorney filing. But the actual deed transfer didn't happen until July when you were away in Phoenix. I felt the cold steel of realization slide into place. They waited for me to leave town, to make it look clean. Vance nodded grimly. David didn't even need your signature with that POA in place. But then this... He pointed again at the document. This signature doesn't match your legal one. And here, he flipped to a notarized page. Different notary than the one listed at the county office. You're saying it's fake, I asked. I'm saying it's suspect, enough that a court would take it seriously. He leaned back. Do you have a copy of your original POA agreement, or was that kept in their home? I never saw it again after I signed it. Dad said he'd hold on to it with the important stuff. Vance snorted. I'll bet he did. My hands trembled as I sifted through the rest of the file. Everything looked official. Crisp. Calculated. This wasn't sloppy, I said. This was methodical. They didn't just take my house, I added, voice hollow. They weaponized my trust. Carol placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. They didn't expect you to come back swinging, she said. But I didn't answer. I was staring at my own forged signature, wondering just how many other truths had been reshaped while I'd been looking the other way. A broken pane can be replaced. But what if someone breaks it just to call the cops on you? The envelope trembled in my hand as I slipped it into the Monroe family mailbox, the brass flap clinking softly in the early evening stillness. The letter was plain, professional, a formal dispute notice regarding the property drafted with Mr. Vance's exacting tone. No threats, no accusations, just facts. I stood on the curb for a beat too long. From behind the drawn curtains, the house pulsed with warm light. Ava's silhouette moved casually through the living room, cradling a mug like she owned the world. Maybe she thought she did. I turned and left, breathing the late summer air, cool and thick with pending storm. By the time I reached Carol's driveway, I'd convinced myself it was a small step forward. One pebble in a long avalanche, then came the post. She came back again. Please pray for peace in our home tonight. No names. Just those 12 words paired with a blurry photo of the cracked window facing the porch. I recognized the jagged break instantly, front right pane, the one we used to peek through on Christmas mornings. I stared at the post, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ava had over 300 followers on the community Facebook page. The comments poured in like syrup, sticky cloying and hard to wipe clean. Sending prayers, Ava. You deserve peace. I hope someone reports her. She's always been volatile. I refreshed the page. The photo now had 57 shares. What the hell? I muttered, dialing Ethan. He picked up on the second ring. You saw it. I dropped off a legal letter. That's it. Then this. My voice rose ragged. She cracked a window and blamed me. You can't prove you didn't, he said not unkindly. And that's the problem. My screen lit up with a new text from Lorraine. You're scaring Ava. Please stop. Just 6 words, and they crushed more than all the gossip combined. Rachel. Ethan's voice pulled me back. Lay low. Let me talk to Vance. We'll file a protective response. But it was too late for quiet steps. By noon the next day, a knock rattled Carol's front door. A uniformed deputy handed me a manila envelope, glanced away when I met his eyes. Inside, a formal no-contact warning. Signed not by Ava, but by Lorraine and David Monroe. The words blurred, but I read them anyway. Emotional distress, harassment, unwanted visits. Carol cursed under her breath and snatched the papers from me. They're trying to isolate you, she said. Classic playbook, but I couldn't even summon the anger. Only that familiar ache, sharp and deep and echoing from childhood. I remembered the vase, how it shattered on the tile, how Ava cried, how I was grounded for a week, how Mom never questioned it. And now she broke the window. I got the sentence. Churches offer sanctuary, but only if you follow their version of the gospel. I stared at the reply on my screen, heart pounding hard enough to blur the letters. Let's meet. Tomorrow. Brew and Bean. 4 p.m. DE. I hadn't signed the email with my name. I'd used a burner account, cloaked my wording in careful neutrality. But somehow, Dean Everett, clerk of the community board and former scholarship kid at our church, had seen straight through me. Still I went. The next day, I arrived 5 minutes early and waited at a table near the window, hands wrapped around a lukewarm coffee. Dean walked in wearing the same rumpled shirt I remembered from high school. He hadn't changed much. Quieter now, perhaps. Sharper. I thought it might be you, he said, sliding into the seat opposite me. I said nothing. You used to write my English essays. I'd know your syntax anywhere. He smiled faintly. Thanks for the B- on The Great Gatsby, by the way. A breath escaped my lips, half laugh, half warning. Dean set his bag down and pulled out a manila folder, its corners dog-eared, the pages inside peppered with annotations. These are the minutes from the last board meeting, he said. Ava Monroe's name came up 4 times. 3 mentions of residential instability, 1 outreach initiative. I flipped through the sheets. My hands shook. Page 5, he said, tapping the edge. They're recommending her for the Eden Housing Grant. I swallowed hard. But that's for displaced residents, individuals unfairly removed from family property. I closed the folder, trying to keep the fury behind my ribs. She's calling herself the displaced one. Dean didn't answer directly. Instead, he pulled out a second sheet, a printed line from the grant charter. All grants subject to community hearing if documented objections are raised by an affected party. You qualify, he said. You lived there. Paid for it. You're in the deed history. She'll spin it. She already is. Dean leaned in. But here's the part no one else has your voice. I looked at him, surprised. I hadn't expected belief. Not from anyone who'd grown up in that town under that pulpit. You tutored me when I was failing math, Dean said softly. No one noticed me. You did. I remember. I turned my gaze to the window, blinking away the sudden sting. Outside, the church steeple pierced the sky cold white immaculate. But inside that folder lay my first crack of light. Okay, I said finally. Let's give them a voice they can't ignore. Turns out someone did remember the girl who tutored him when no one else would. They told me truth would set me free. They never said it had to wear a suit and tie. The city clerk's office smelled like toner and coffee gone sour. The woman behind the plexiglass partition tapped at her keyboard with the enthusiasm of someone performing community service for a crime she didn't commit. I'm here to submit a request to speak at the community housing grant hearing, I said, folder in hand. She didn't look up. Form 89, a yes, filled, signed, supporting documentation included. She held out a hand. I slid the folder under the partition. Her nails painted a dull mauve tapped through the papers like they were suspect currency. I'll mark it for review, she mumbled. And the confirmation. Her eyes finally met mine flat and uninterested. You'll hear back in 5-10 business days. I blinked. The hearing is in 7. She shrugged. I walked out with a heat in my chest that had nothing to do with the early October humidity. The sky above City Hall looked ready to spit rain, but I welcomed the chill. It matched the tone of the day. Back at Carol's, I dumped my soaked jacket on the chair and collapsed onto the air mattress she'd set up for me. My inbox blinked with one unread message. Mr. Vance. Received deed analysis. Confirmed discrepancy with initial transfer. Follow paper trail. Ava's signature on delivery confirmation looks suspect. You're building a case, Rachel. Ethan called right as I was drafting a reply. Well, he asked, voice warm despite static. They took my form, buried it in red tape, and handed me a receipt for disappointment. He chuckled gently. You knew it wouldn't be easy. I thought the truth had weight. That if I just showed up with it, someone would care. Truth doesn't win by yelling louder. It wins on paper, he reminded me. And you've got that now. I stared at the folder again. Documents from the bank, copies of the deed, the power of attorney, and tucked between 2 notarized statements, the receipt. A delivery acknowledgement for the grant paperwork signed not by my parents, but by Ava. The initials curved like mine, but wrong in the way forged signatures always are trying too hard to look effortless. I held it in my hand for a long time. Carol peeked into the room. Rain's coming harder, she said. You need anything? I shook my head. Just space. When she left, I whispered to the walls, the rain, the ghost of my dignity. This isn't just grief anymore. It's grounds. I opened my calendar. Next Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. My 5 minutes. They're reckoning. Sometimes the deepest breath comes before the loudest scream. The blinking cursor mocked me. Version 21. Each draft before it had carried either too much fire or none at all. Too much pleading. Too much rage. Too much of everything except what mattered. I deleted the last line again. Carol's voice floated up from the kitchen, humming a hymn I hadn't heard since childhood. The smell of mint tea followed it, wrapping around the silence like gauze. I had asked for no interruptions. She honored that, but she stayed close. I stood and opened the attic window. The trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets I'd spent too long ignoring. The community didn't care about my feelings. They wanted form, order, a performance they could quantify. In the corner, my speech pages curled at the edges like they too were tired of this fight. Downstairs, Carol set a mug beside me without a word. Mint, steaming, grounding. You're not just fighting for a house, she said softly. You're fighting to not disappear. I feel like I already have, I admitted. Her hand covered mine. Then you fight louder. At the library that afternoon, I booked the quiet room. Just me and my reflection in the glass, practicing the words again and again. I was erased. I am not gone. A young librarian passed by and gave me a small smile. You've been coming in a lot, she said gently. Whatever it is, you look ready. I nodded, throat too tight to thank her. Later, as dusk wrapped itself in cool tones, I parked a block from the house. My house. The porch lights flicked on. Ava appeared at the door with a glass of wine, eyes locking on me like she'd expected this drive-by. She raised her glass in mock salute. No malice, just smugness, like a queen nodding to a defeated rival. I didn't return the gesture. The phone buzzed. Ethan. You okay, Define? Okay, I whispered. I know you're scared, but truth. His voice softened. Whatever happens tomorrow, it's still your truth, and that matters. I exhaled slowly. Thank you. That night, I printed the speech, packed my folder, rehearsed one last time in the mirror, watched my own mouth form the sentence that had taken a lifetime to shape. I was erased. I am not gone. And I believed it. Tuesday. I walk into the room where they all decided I didn't count. Let's see who listens now. They gave me 5 minutes. I only needed 4 to dismantle a lie. The sanctuary looked different with folding chairs. Familiar stained glass windows, now framed faces I hadn't seen in years. Mrs. Cutler from the HOA board. Mr. Lang from the auto shop, even Pastor Brennan standing like a statue at the podium. And in the front row, Ava. Hair curled, dress spotless. Mic clipped to her lapel like a news anchor awaiting her segment. Dean caught my eye from the aisle seat. He gave a curt nod. That was all I needed. Pastor Brennan tapped the mic. Before we vote on Eden housing allocations, one resident has requested to speak regarding grant candidate Ava Monroe. Miss Rachel Monroe, you have the floor. 5 minutes. I rose, folder clutched tight. Every muscle in my legs remembered the weight of judgment, but I walked anyway. As I reached the front, I passed Ava. She smiled sweet and sure as if I were about to sing her praises. I turned to the room. No notes, no podium. Just me. My name is Rachel Monroe. You know my parents, David and Lorraine. You know my sister, Ava. What you may not know is that the house at 19 Laurel Creek, her current residence, was purchased in my name in 2017. With my funds, my credit, my belief that family meant shared foundation. Murmurs. I held up the deed copy. 2 months ago, I returned home to find my key didn't fit. The locks were changed. I was locked out of the house I paid for. Ava shifted in her seat. The mic on her collar twitched with her breath. Through legal counsel, I've reviewed the transfer documents. There was no sale, no consent. What existed was a durable power of attorney signed while I was hospitalized and used without my knowledge. I pulled the next page from the folder. This is a receipt Ava signed using my initials to accept delivery of the grant documents for Eden Housing. More murmurs. She says I'm bitter. I continued, voice steady, that I'm emotional, but bitterness doesn't produce paper trails. I stepped aside and gestured to Dean seated behind a small projector screen. He tapped a button. The email appeared large and bold behind me. Once the grant comes through, I'll flip the house and finally have enough to move to California. The timestamp was 2 weeks prior. Gasps. Someone whispered. She was planning to sell. Ava stood abruptly. That's out of context. It was. Pastor Brennan raised a hand. Miss Monroe, please let her finish. But I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. Because Carol was right. You don't just tell the truth. You show them what lies cost. I looked at Ava, still holding the mic. The silence wasn't awkward, it was awakening. And Ava was still holding the mic, but her voice was shaking. ChatGPT Danoy. Sometimes the truth doesn't need a sword, just a crack in the mask. The meeting adjourned for 5 minutes after my speech, but no one left the room. They huddled in pew corners and along hallway walls, whispering like a storm was coming, and no one was sure who'd be swept away. Behind the sanctuary in the small back room reserved for council deliberations and potlucks gone tense, Pastor Brennan adjusted his collar for the 5th time. Dean stood at his side, a laptop open cursor hovering over a media file. Ava paced. I demand to speak on record, she said, voice tight. You all let her spew her sob story. Now I get to respond. I leaned against the doorframe. You're not responding. You're unraveling. Carol touched my elbow, a silent reminder, don't push. Let gravity do the work. Dean nodded to Brennan. Per procedure, opposing testimony is permitted, but first we have an additional piece of information to review. He clicked. A file played. Once the grant clears, we're done with the Monroe girl problem. She'll move on. She always does. Ava's voice. Crisp, confident, caught. Let her cry fraud. She's got no proof anyone tricked her. It was all legal. And if Brennan signs off, that's our cover. Brennan's voice replied, faint. Keep it clean. I can't cover sloppiness. Silence. Then Brennan cleared his throat. I may not have followed procedural transparency, but intentions were good. Dean didn't even flinch. Intentions don't nullify manipulation. Ava's lips parted. That was taken out of context. I turned toward her. Tell them the context then. Go ahead. She looked at the council, the volunteers, her fans. Her halo slipped one fraying strand at a time. I look okay, fine. Her voice cracked. I lied. But she was never supposed to get the house anyway. Gasps rang out like a clap of thunder. Brennan flinched. The city attorney scribbled something onto his pad eyes, suddenly alive. Carol's hand squeezed mine. Dean stared straight ahead, calm like a man who already saw the outcome hours ago. Ava's face paled. That's not what I meant. Too late. Because there are moments when a single sentence doesn't just expose a lie, it pulls the mask off with it. And that's when they stopped seeing her as a sister and started seeing me as a citizen. ChatGPT Danoy. When the house caught fire metaphorically, they all ran, but I stood there watching it burn. The front page landed on Carol's porch before sunrise. From favoritism to fraud. A community unmasked underneath the headline, Ava's name was printed in bold ink beside phrases like breach of trust, misappropriation, and family deception. I didn't buy the paper. I didn't need to. People sent photos of it to my inbox like offerings. By noon, Ava was gone. Packed up, fled, vanished like a storm that knew it had no safe harbor left. No goodbye, no apology. Just a last-minute withdrawal from the housing grant and a deleted social media account. Pastor Brennan released a statement. We regret procedural oversights. A review board will be formed. By afternoon, he'd stepped down from the Community Budget Committee indefinitely. Dean said it best during the post-meeting wrap-up. They weren't sorry until it cost them something. David never called, never texted. When I passed him in the hardware store aisle a week later, he looked down and examined a row of identical screws like they held the secrets of the universe. And Lorraine, a letter, folded twice. Mailed from the same address where I once left my keys. Rachel, we didn't know how to love you right. I'm sorry it took fire for me to see your shape through the smoke. Mom, that was it. No return address, no mention of Ava, just smoke. A week later, I drove by the house. My house. The front yard looked smaller now, the shutters duller, the porch less welcoming. I didn't go in, though the new owner had given me permission. I only stepped inside once out of curiosity. The room that was once mine had been gutted, paint-peeled furniture removed, every trace of me erased. Empty rooms echo differently when you're the only one listening. Later that night over tea, Carol said, "You could rebuild it." I shook my head. No. Some ashes aren't meant to be swept. She studied me. Still hurts. I took a breath. Let it sit on my tongue before answering. They didn't just lose their daughter, I said quietly. They lost their mirror. Carol didn't speak, but I saw the truth in her eyes. What's left after the fire isn't always worth reclaiming. But sometimes justice isn't about reclaiming. Sometimes justice is just knowing they'll never dare say your name again. ChatGPT Danoy. This time I signed the papers, but I wasn't giving anything away. The pen didn't shake. I thought it might the way it had in Mr. Vance's office that first day when everything felt stolen, warped, unfixable. But today the pen moved clean. Steady, like it knew exactly where it belonged. The council chamber was quieter than usual, stripped of tension now that the storm had passed. Dean handed me the folder. Gold seal, red ribbon, symbolic peace offerings for the sins no one wanted to say aloud. Rachel Monroe. He said, his voice calm but certain the board has reviewed the documentation. The house at 112 Sycamore Lane is to be returned to your legal name. Effective immediately. Mr. Vance nodded beside me, arms crossed like a knight surveying a drawbridge being raised after years of siege. But there was one more document. A civil waiver. We'd like to resolve this without ongoing litigation, the city rep added, tapping the page. In exchange, we offer full property reinstatement and a formal letter of apology published in the quarterly bulletin and local press. Vance gave me a look that wasn't quite advice. It was respect. I took the pen. Signed. Carol exhaled quietly behind me. There was no celebration. No applause. Just the sound of closure, soft and somehow heavier than the weight it lifted. I thought Ava might have been there. For formality. For decency. But her chair stayed empty. Dean had told me earlier that morning she left town 2 days ago. Quietly, no statement, just boxes and silence. The community didn't seem to miss her. Not anymore. As I turned to leave, Dean caught my arm. There's one more thing. He handed me a printed letter. Lorraine's handwriting shaky, familiar, to whom it may concern. She never asked to be golden, but we painted her that way while leaving Rachel in the dark. We didn't protect a daughter. We projected an ideal, and in doing so, we failed the one who stayed honest. To Rachel, I see you now. Lorraine Monroe. I didn't cry, but I felt something untangle inside me. Later at Carol's, I stood over the same table where we had once opened folders full of forged signatures and betrayal. Now it held a single deed. Clean. Mine. You okay? Carol asked. I don't know what to feel. You don't have to feel everything today, she said. Just feel the fact that it's yours. I reached for the pen again this time to file it into the record. I signed my name again this time to something that truly belonged to me. It's still the same house, but now it breathes only truth. The scent of pine still lingered on the porch. This time, though, it wasn't clinging to memory. It was part of the breeze, fresh and unburdened, like the house had finally exhaled after holding its breath for years. I stood there for a moment longer than I meant to, key in hand, cardboard box balanced on one hip. The house looked smaller now, not because it had changed, but because I had. I turned the lock for the final time. Not because I had to, because I chose to. Carol waited by the curb, the passenger door already open. A thermos of her honey chai steamed quietly in the cup holder, her version of a farewell speech. Inside the house, everything that mattered had already been moved. What was left were echoes patches on the wall where pictures once hung, the scratch on the hallway floor, from that dropped piano leg, the corner in the kitchen where I used to press my back and breathe through anxiety. I didn't cry. There wasn't sadness in this goodbye. There was something bigger. Clarity. Closure. Ethan called just as I slid into Carol's car. "You sure?" he asked. "Positive," I said. "It's not mine to carry anymore." I wasn't running. I wasn't erasing. I was choosing legacy over possession. The paperwork for the sale was already finalized. Proceeds allocated by my request to a new foundation, Second Key. A place for women who'd been silenced in the fine print, forgotten in their own stories. A grant. A voice. A key. A letter from Dean had arrived that morning. No envelope. Just folded cardstock. "Rachel, you made truth louder than comfort. And in a town that worshipped silence, that's nothing short of a miracle." "Thank you, Dean," I smiled. Let the letter rest on the dash. Before we pulled away, I stepped back once more, pressed my hand to the new brass plate beside the front door. Rachel Monroe, rightful owner. I hadn't chosen the font, but the words were mine. There would be no parade, no confetti, just this warm air, the squeak of moving boxes, the sound of feet walking forward. And as I walked away, I didn't feel loss. I felt legacy. Justice didn't roar, it whispered through signed papers and empty chairs. A home was reclaimed not just in bricks, but in truth, in the quiet undoing of a lie. Some wounds don't need revenge. They need recognition. Because when injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. If this story spoke to you, share and drop your thoughts in the comments, type 1. If you felt seen too, if you're still thinking,